happy to answer any questions that you may have later on. But today we have the privilege to have this press conference to release one important study, a landmark study that started a few years ago in Spain. And the New England Journal of Medicine has published ahead of print today, at the day that Dr. Martinez is going to present simultaneously here in the Congress. So it's my privilege to introduce one of the lead researchers on this Predimed study. And so, Dr. Martinez, why don't you come to the podium?
Thank you very much, John. It is a pleasure for me to be here today presenting for the first time in public the results of the Predimed trial. It will be a pleasure for me to answer your questions. So I will be briefly going over the main aspects of the design and results of this trial that has been just published today, online first. So this is the research team. So Professor Jordi Sales is also here to help me to answer your questions. And this is a network of researchers all over Spain with a lot of centers. This is the initial team. And the study has been funded by the official agency for funding biomedical research in Spain, which is the equivalent to the NIH. And the name is Instituto de Salud Carlos III. With these networks, I have been the coordinator of one of this network, the second that appears on the slide. So this was the main funding of the trial. In addition, we provided food at no cost to participants, to the groups of participants, depending on the allocation. So we included the help from the food industry only for providing food items. For a group, we provided for free virgin olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, and the shipment, we shipped 2.5 tons of olive oil every week to our participants. That's huge. That gives you an idea of the size of the study. And the provision of nuts, mainly walnuts from the California Walnut Commission, and also almonds and hazelnuts from Borges, another Spanish company, La Morella. And this is the design of the trial. We included men and women from 55 to 80 for men and 60 to 80 for women who were at high cardiovascular risk, a high risk of cardiovascular disease, but with no previous cardiovascular events. And they were at high risk because either they have type 2 diabetes or they have 3 or more major cardiovascular risk factors. Among the following 6 cardiovascular risk factors, there is the classical risk factors: smoking, hypertension, high levels of LDL cholesterol, low levels of HDL cholesterol, overweight or obesity, or family history of premature coronary heart disease. And they were randomly allocated to 3 equally sized groups: a group with education on Mediterranean diet plus free provision of virgin olive oil, the second group with the same education on Mediterranean diet plus free provision of mixed tree nuts, and the third group was allocated to the conventional cardiovascular prevention diet at that time, 2003. That was mainly, we can call it a low-fat diet, but we prefer to refer to this group as the control group. So this is the timeline for the recruitment of participants. This is the percentage of participants recruited every year, and to the right column, the cumulative percentage of recruited participants. You can see that at 2005, we recruited more than half of the sample. So the follow-up continued thereafter. And we had this help, very important help, that we deeply appreciate from our external advisor in the Data Safety and Monitoring Board, Professor Pisunier, who chaired this committee from Columbia University, Professor Hu from Harvard, Professor Sabaté from Loma Linda, and Dr. Carlos Gonzalez, who is the principal investigator of a large cohort study in Spain, the EPIC Spain cohort. And these are the characteristics of the participants. You see here the number of participants included in every arm of the trial. They were at the beginning of the trial age 67. A little bit more than half of the participants were women. Half of them were diabetics, type 2 diabetics, and more than 80% of them have hypertension. The proportion of current smoking was about 15%. Most of them had high cholesterol levels. Most of them were overweight or obese. The average BMI was 30, and also with abdominal obesity. That were the characteristics of the participants. Well, the important thing here is that the three groups were completely comparable, completely balanced with respect to major cardiovascular risk factors. So all the differences that we are going to see now regarding cardiovascular events can be causally attributed to the dietary intervention, because this was the single difference between the three groups. And this is the power of a randomized trial. Especially for primary prevention, this is unique. This is the importance of this study. Well, the primary endpoint was the rate of major cardiovascular events, either cardiovascular death or myocardial infarction or stroke. And the intervention consisted in changing the overall food pattern. In the two active Mediterranean diet groups, we leave total fat at libitum, and we introduced a diet that was typical Mediterranean and classical diet with high in monounsaturated fat coming from virgin olive oil, fish, fruits, vegetables, legumes, but low in meats and dairy. A goal for all participants was to have at least one day a week without any meat or meat product. Alcohol was permitted mainly in the form of red wine consumed with meals. And in the low-fat diet, the control group, we reduced every type of fat, and we increased, and therefore, consequently, the carbohydrate content. There was no energy restriction in any group, and no specific recommendation on physical activity. So the main issue was the overall food pattern, and I insist that we provided extra virgin olive oil, because this is not only monounsaturated fat, but the minor components like tocopherols, polyphenols, flavonoids, phytosterols are very importantly related to anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties and other bioactive functions. And what is the Mediterranean diet? We use a very interesting tool that is this 14 points score to assess the adherence to the Mediterranean diet. And this was very useful for intervention because you can provide immediate feedback to the participants. So the dietitian can negotiate how to obtain 1 point more in the next 3 months. So this was little by little upgrading the adherence to the Mediterranean diet. And so you see in red font the bad guys, in in white font the good guys. So you have to increase the consumption of olive oil, vegetable, fruits, wine, legumes, fish and seafood, nuts, poultry instead of red meats, and sofrito. Sofrito is a special sauce made with tomato, onion, sometimes garlic, and slowly simmer in virgin olive oil that is used as a garnish for some dishes in the typical Mediterranean cuisine. We have included this more or less with the same 14 points in the main paper, but everything is further detailed in the supplementary appendix of the publication that appears today. This is the 14-point questionnaire that we used to educate participants, and this was important. So this 40-point score has been related to a lower risk of abdominal obesity in our cohort in a recent publication. And monotonically, it's very nice to see that there is an inverse association with abdominal obesity. And we use all these means. I am not going to go further because I assume that you have read the paper. So you can find there all these elements of the intervention. We have individual personalized advice every 3 months and group session with less than 20 participants every 3 months during all this period. And we provide for free 1 liter a week of olive oil to participants in the first group, and 30 grams per day, 15 grams of walnuts, and 7.5 of hazelnuts and almonds. So double the walnuts, because there is much more information about the healthy benefits of walnuts. And this is the result of increased adherence. We maintain a significant difference throughout all the duration of the trial. These are the two Mediterranean diet groups, and these are the control group. And you can see that there was a difference of about 2 points in adherence, in average adherence, along all the trial. At the beginning, they were comparable. There were no statistically significant differences between both groups at the beginning, but during the follow-up, there were. And this is a very important slide for me, because you can see here all the 14 elements of our intervention. And in 12 out of the 14, we found at 3 years statistically significant differences with a higher adherence to each of the 12 points in the 2 Mediterranean diet groups compared with the control group. So we changed the overall food pattern. But the changes in energy, nutrient, and supplemental food intake, in spite that they were also statistically significant, they were minor in magnitude. You can see here that we increased the consumption of fat, and we reduced the consumption of carbohydrates in the 2 active Mediterranean diet groups. But the changes were not very large. And we also assessed the compliance with the 2 Mediterranean diet using biomarkers in random samples of participants. So we use urinary hydroxyl, which is a sensitive marker of consumption of extra virgin olive oil. And we found statistically significant differences in this objective biomarker of compliance. And the same can be said about alpha-linolenic acid in plasma, which is a sensitive biomarker of a reliable biomarker of consumption of walnuts. So we found also a significant difference in the expected duration. Well, the retention was high. Most of participants were followed up successfully after an average time of almost 5 years. And the losses to follow up were greater in the control group. You see here, 11% losses to follow up. We mean, when we say losses to follow up, that we do not have contact with the participant for the last 2 years. And this is the primary endpoint. This is the rate. You see here that this is per 1,000 person years follow-up. We saw in the 2 Mediterranean diet groups a significant reduction in the risk of major cardiovascular events. And you see that the rate, the absolute rate, is higher in the control group than in the 2 Mediterranean diet groups. And when we compare then using multivariate analysis, we found these hazard ratios. There is the relative risk with these confidence intervals that we found for the 2 groups, almost exactly the same protection. This is a 30% relative reduction in the risk of major cardiovascular events. You need to take into account that cardiovascular events are the main cause of death in the world, and we are obtaining a 30% reduction in the risk just with a dietary intervention. This is the important message of our study. And the 3 groups were equal in everything else. That's the important take-home message. And we see here the survival curves, the incidence curves, and you see that the 2 Mediterranean diet done almost the same, did almost the same regarding the incidence of major cardiovascular events with these hazard ratios. These hazard ratios have not been adjusted for other risk factors and in the previous slide. And across subgroups of sex, age, and diabetes, the results were fairly consistent. And for secondary endpoints, when we speak of secondary endpoints, we're separating every single component of the combined cardiovascular endpoint. And so we found only for stroke a significant inverse association. The confidence intervals were wider when we have only a lower number of events. And for total mortality, there was a reduction in the risk, but it wasn't statistically significant. We didn't find evidence to support an inverse association, although the point estimates were lower for the 2 Mediterranean diet groups. Okay.